Hello, welcome to Boomstick Gaming. This is Alex, and I want to talk a bit about Ghost Recon Breakpoint, but specifically if I think you, the viewer, may or may not enjoy the overall gameplay experience based on a few key features I'm going to discuss. I think certain types of gamers will really gravitate towards some elements in this game, while the complete opposite might also apply for others. It's always hard to tell if a new game is going to click for you or not before getting your own hands on it, but that's where I come in because I'm going to do my best to show you what you may enjoy in Breakpoint and what you may not. Ghost Recon Breakpoint, if I could easily sum it up in one elongated phrase, is essentially third-person Far Cry in regards to overall map progression, outpost-focused encounters, with similar enemy AI, and a dash of the Division's somewhat more serious tone, along with the more recent Assassin's Creed level geared system. I am specifically referencing other Ubisoft properties because in a lot of ways, Breakpoint is an amalgamation of their whole open-world design philosophy wrapped into one package. The focus here seems to be on the world itself, which is where Ubisoft usually excels, and in this regard, the design team seemed to really knock it out of the park. I have not been so regularly awestruck by the overall complexity and detail in a game's world since the open-air freedom presented in Breath of the Wild. If you are the type of player who enjoys the escapism of gaming and the satisfaction of checking off icons on your map as you slowly overtake gigantic environments, you might actually find solace in Breakpoint's gorgeous and varied open-world design. This makes Breakpoint an ideal completionist sandbox playground. However, if you're the type of player, perhaps from the older generation of Ghost Recon titles, you might find the carefree romp to feel somewhat repetitive and lacking that focused tactical structure you desire, regardless of how well crafted the environment is. While the gunplay and controls feel fine, even if you pump up the difficulty to max, the core gameplay feels somewhat on the easy side and lacking the deep tactical intricacies from the franchise's past. If you strip away any preconceived ideas of what you think or want Ghost Recon to be, you'll find a fairly solid open world shooter here, but I feel the attached name might bring some valid and invalid criticism alike. Breakpoint touts that instead of being the hunter like in Wildlands, you are essentially now the hunted as you fight for your life to survive. While on paper this sounds pretty good, in practice the overall survival elements are nearly non-existent. Even when playing on the highest difficulty, injury and exhaustion were infrequent and usually non-threatening. There are, however, numerous threats that will seek you out and if unavoided will likely take you down fairly quickly. For the most part though, you are regularly a Rambo-style action hero who can easily take down entire encampments in broad daylight, which is again why I referenced it feeling more like a third-person Far Cry game, just with more of a focus on co-op and PvP elements. If that analogy perks up your ears, and if you enjoy the more carefree open-world design associated with that franchise, you will more than likely have fun in the gargantuan sandbox they provide here, but if my analogy makes you groan with the burden of repetitive open-world fatigue, Ghost Recon Breakpoint's gameplay flow will not change your point of view. This brings us to my final conclusion and the reason why I'm not doing a more formal scored review of Breakpoint, because this is the style of game where some of the cons are actually pros and some of the pros are actually cons, depending on individual gamer preference. On one hand, the map offers a ludicrous amount of somewhat similar combat encounters all throughout that some might find tedious or mindless, while others will see this as a great value proposition because if they happen to enjoy the core shooter gameplay loop, they have dozens, if not hundreds of hours of content to take on, and both are perfectly valid points of view. Now, if I have done my job correctly up to this point, you should already have a feeling of if this game is the type of experience you will like or not, but just in case you're still undecided, I will go into some detail of what I would personally like to see tweaked in the game via future updates, as well as my overall general impressions. First off, I was not blown away initially by how I was tackling Breakpoint by simply going from quest marker to quest marker, but as soon as I broke free of this style and simply started exploring and taking things on as I came across them, I found the methodical question mark icon sleuthing style of the map to be somewhat cathartic. This, however, does not mean that Breakpoint is a perfect open world experience. The main element I would like to see improved or retooled is the entire enemy AI, which is what I would attribute to the somewhat lower difficulty of Breakpoint. While the tactical abilities and gunplay are all there, they are rarely absolutely required since the enemies are incredibly easy to pick off one by one. For this reason, I highly recommend any gamer of a decent skill level to immediately pump the difficulty up to either advanced or extreme, which will somewhat improve the difficulty curve with raw lethality. Ubisoft seems to have their world designs all but mastered. They always have somewhat straightforward and solid combat systems, but their enemy AI seems to be roughly the same base coding from game to game, which is easily the area they need to improve the most to truly make their titles feel groundbreaking. It's not to say the enemies are completely brain dead, but they are very predictable, especially if you played any Ubisoft games from the last decade or so, because I feel I have fought these exact same enemies before, even though technically I have not. Lastly, one other element I would like to see tweaked is the gear progression that for far too long in the early hours boils down to only equipping whatever you find with an arbitrary higher gear score. The more rare loot does have passive abilities alongside their gear rating, which does help to diversify your loadout, but it takes far too long until you start getting loot that you truly care about, which is something that dilutes your motivation for exploration, at least early on. There are microtransactions in the game where you can buy new skins, weapons, and all kinds of stuff, but I found this all easily avoidable and by no means tied to what I just referenced, but still something to keep in mind. The amount of gear and in-game currency you gain naturally feels decently fair, but I just wish the loot had more going on with it in the initial 10 hours or so. Those were my overall thoughts on Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and hopefully this somewhat prepared you for what you can expect from the core gameplay loop in the game. If you happen to enjoy my more level-headed approach to gaming coverage, because let's be honest, my viewers are smart enough to make their own decisions, consider subscribing to the channel, ringing that little bell icon if you already are, and you can also find me on Twitter at BoomstickAlex. Lastly, a special mention to these top YouTube members and patrons who greatly help to support this individually owned and operated channel. As always, this has been Alex from Boomstick Gaming, and thanks for watching.